Mark Harmsworth joins us now. Mark is our Center for Small Business Director and has been watching the budget as well. Mark, there's been a lot of movement in the high tech area, high tech and high tax, soon to be, area where we've had even the president of Microsoft now, publicly state he's worried about the state of Washington's future in high tech. Just, from your own background as a high tech guy yourself, how serious do you see this problem for Washington? And, even if the worst of the taxes are stopped this year, how does this position Washington in the future? I mean, doesn't this put us on some tenuous ground in the high tech world for the foreseeable future until they can be confident, if they're going to locate here, that we won't go, too far in a direction that would be detrimental to their business?
Yeah, and I think that a lot of these things that we're seeing now are really going to be catastrophic for Washington state's, not just the large corporations like Microsoft and Amazon, but the small businesses as well. The Democrats last night passed out a $77.8 billion biennial budget, which assumes over 5 billion in new taxes, including the tax that will really impact the large corporations like Amazon and Microsoft. It's basically it's modeled on what they did in Seattle, where they put a payroll tax on high earning employees when the company makes over a certain amount of money. In this case, it's $7 million. So if your company makes more than 7 million a year, when your employees are above the base Social Security cutoff, then you have this payroll tax. And so what Seattle just realized is a big duh, which is these companies that can afford to move out of Seattle to avoid the tax did. And they're now facing a $47 million shortfall within this first year or so of this tax being issued. The state's going to have the same issue. And that's the warning shot that Microsoft and Amazon and some of these other companies are going to be making. If not, they've already had those conversations to say, hey, why are you doing this? As you're literally killing the golden goose. So they've got this payroll tax they're talking about. They've also got this wealth tax that they're talking about, which affects large companies right now. But you know how this works. They would pass this thing and then they start cranking it down. The payroll tax would go from 7 million down, and then the wealth tax starts out at 50 million. That would drop down. And you think that sounds like a lot of money. But your average roofing company with 30, 40 employees is making 50 million gross a year. But the employees and the owners aren't making that kind of money because they've got now apparently payroll taxes too, and property taxes, and all sorts of things they're paying. So it's critical, and yet the majority party in Olympia seems to think people are literally, according to Representative Mia Gregerson, going to die if they don't pass this $77.8 billion, excuse me, budget with these assumed increases. They haven't voted on the increases yet. Those are in bills that are in committee and appear to be getting a lot of feedback on these bills.
Yeah, speaking of feedback, there was also a hearing on the property tax, possibility of lifting the lids on property taxes, tripling the ability to increase taxes, the percent anyway. Tell us what happened with the hearing and where that bill is at. And but before you do that, just a quick synopsis of what it would do for those who have not heard on the property tax measures.
Yeah. So on the property tax measure, basically, as you know, voters approved many years ago a cap of 1% increase each year. So your local city and so on can only raise your property taxes based on the assessed value of the city, which is why it's a little weird. Sometimes your taxes might go up a different amount than your neighbors. It's all about assessed value, but it was capped at 1%. There was also a provision in there if they didn't raise 1%, they could come back and use that banked capacity, as they call it, in future years in case they needed to. In my city, at the time I was elected on the Mill Creek City Council, we didn't raise property taxes. We didn't need to. We lived within our means and we did the right thing. I'm not saying that wouldn't always be necessary because costs increase, but we were able to do it for 7 years. Now, what this legislation does, and there's actually two pieces of competing legislation, depending on the House, the Senate version. The House triples that rate to 3%. The Senate version changes the calculation to be CPI plus population growth, which could exceed 3% property tax increase each year. So if you have a city that has maybe done really well over the last few years and the makeup of that council changes and they've got maybe 5% in bank capacity, and then they switch to the Senate version, you could be seeing 8 or 10% increase in your property taxes just from your local municipality. The state wants this money for this perceived shortfall, which is actually just they can't control their spending. They're now projecting to spend 5 billion more this year to 78 billion total, which incidentally, when I left office in 2018, we were at 42 billion. So that shows you how fast they've grown state government, including the 8,000 employees they've hired since COVID.
Yeah, as soon as when I heard the $20 billion tax increase, I thought, well, I remember when a biennial budget was what, $32 billion, and now we're talking about just increases of that size, and it's not that long ago, like you say, 2018. What was it, 42, $43 billion,
Yeah, 42, 43. And just to close out on the property tax stuff,
Yeah.
right now they've had the hearings. They haven't scheduled them for exec session. So keep reaching out to your representatives and letting them know what you think about it.
Now, why is that important? Not scheduling for the executive session? Because when you told me that, and they had these hearings, but they haven't scheduled it yet. When this is something that's been kind of a high priority, high profile thing for a lot of people who advocate for higher taxes, they want this property tax for the revenue it would bring in, and for it not to be scheduled already. My first thought was, well, there must have been a lot of people showing up at the hearing in one way or the other, letting them know that they're not thrilled about that.
Yeah, there were over 300 people that signed in to testify on this property tax increase bill. And out of that, the vast majority, I think there were only 15 or 20, maybe 25 that were pro increasing the taxes. 290 or so were against it. But the real telling thing was the signed in but not testifying. There were 45,000 people that signed in against this bill and only 1,500, 2,000 that were pro. And most of those were unions and advocacy groups and folks that were going to benefit from the slush fund that's going to get created as a result of this increase in property taxes. So, the average, and to see numbers like that, 45,000, that's a huge number. I mean, that's really engaged citizens that are calling in and saying, hey, I can't afford this. And not only are you about to apply a wealth tax to me, or at least the owners of my company who are going to pass that cost on in the cost of increased products and services, a payroll tax potentially. Now you're going to triple, if not more, my property taxes. Why do I stay in Washington? Why can't I go to somewhere that's much more tax friendly and a lower cost of living? And this is what Olympia just isn't getting. They're not connecting the dots here for some reason, and understanding that even now these corporate executives are saying, whoa, time out, guys. We don't mind paying our fair share of taxes, but now you've taken it too far and you're literally going to make us leave the state.
Well, the other thing too is, if you reach that tipping point and you drive these prosperity makers out of Washington, where they're the ones attracting all the high-paying jobs, and those people that are making the high-paying jobs are going out to the restaurants. They're the ones buying these individualized items, the bikes to go hiking, the fancy gear, all this stuff, and it just goes, it goes across the board. When you start getting rid of these companies and these people, it really starts impacting Washington's prosperity. And we've had years of this record income coming in for the state. Tax revenue has just been flourishing, and they've been vacuuming it up as fast as possible and spending it as fast as possible. Over the period of time when all that growth happened, there was zero cuts to the state sales tax. So, I know that we've brought this up before, but many people who advocate for the taxes will say, we have this regressive tax system and it just hurts the little guy, and that's why we need these higher taxes. But a chance to reduce the burden on the little guy is slashing the state sales tax, and that has not been done since 1982. One of the proposals has this cut to the sales tax, but it wouldn't actually show up for another 2 years. In other words, they could take it away. I mean, this is like the weird, bizarro Mary Poppins who says it's a spoonful of sugar to get the medicine go down, but I'm not going to give you the sugar for 2 weeks. So you got to choke that medicine down and like it, And I may or may not give it to you later. And that's pretty much what the legislature's doing with this sweetener proposal to make the taxes go down better.
Well, I bet you your bottom dollar that the whole ploy is they're throwing this carrot out there, and they're going to, just like they did with many other bills, including the initiatives, and they just come right back next year and go, "Oh, sorry about that. We can't do that now, so we're not going to give you that sales tax." Even though you may have voted for this, you thinking that you were going to get the sales tax cut. Oops, no, you're not going to get that now. So I'm pretty much guaranteed that's what they're
Oh,
trying to do, and it's going to get stripped out of the legislation. There's no way that they're going to tolerate that. But I'll draw an analogy here. It's kind of like you get yourself a really nice new job and you run out immediately and you go buy yourself a nice BMW or Mercedes car, and then your job evaporates a year later and you're left with a monster car payment. This is what the state's been doing. It's assuming that these jobs will stay here forever, and it keeps on increasing the taxes. And one day these companies will turn around, just like Microsoft moved its volume licensing to Nevada, Boeing moved its headquarters to Chicago. They're kind of, again, recently, but these companies are mobile like this, and particularly in the high tech industry, any company that can move its workers is going to do that. And they know that because the legislation that they've been writing has got all this convoluted language about if you're a remote employee and you do work in Washington, therefore you're subject to the payroll tax and all this kind of stuff. So they get the fact that they're literally forcing these companies to move, and they're trying to compensate for it, not understanding that it doesn't matter where the revenue comes from. If you're a company, you're profitable in another state, they're going to go there.
yeah. We have a quick question from Tom online. He says, I heard the minority party developed a balanced budget. The Republicans put forward a budget with no new taxes. What was the opposition?
Because it didn't have any new taxes in it. And in fact, it increased some of the money put into the essential services that the majority party was interested in doing. But I mean, if you think about where we're at right now, why couldn't we just pass the budget we did 2 years ago? They've got massive increases in there for public sector union employees. They took some of that out, that's for sure. But then when I mentioned this earlier, there's 8,000 employees they've hired since COVID. What are they doing with them? I mean, in the last 5 to 6 years, what have you seen new from your state government that providing services or better services? There isn't anything. All I can think of is more rules and more regulations that make my business and my personal income go down because I'm now paying more taxes or spending more time dealing with the government bureaucracy. So I think that a lot of the opposition was a lot of the pet projects didn't get put in there. They want to pass these taxes, and they want these. They feel that the rich folks in this, which rich in Washington State is a laughing stock. We consider our salaries to be high, but then our cost of living is outrageous as well. And so they just consider these ways to make it more equitable for everybody. And by far, the Republican budget, or any budget that could have done it without tax increases, should be the way we're going, if not a tax cut.
Yeah, well, it's a difficult year, and the level of spending is difficult to comprehend just how huge the ask is and audacious the attitude is about. And previously, there was always a bit of a legislative fear about trying to increase these taxes. This time, there seems to be no hesitation. It's go big or go home, and the proposed increases dwarf any previous biggest tax increase in the history of Washington State, to the degree that it's just not even comparable. It's just fascinating.
Right. To put it in perspective, a $5 billion increase, if there are 5 million taxpayers, the math is really easy. It's $1,000 each.
It's
And
like,
that's
yeah,
$100 a month or $80 a month, whatever it is, increased for every single taxpayer in the state.
I feel
That's
like
just the increase.
Florida, Tennessee, Idaho, a lot of these other states, they're probably just showing TVW as part of their tourist campaign, trying to get people to relocate to Washington. It's a frightening thing, but that's why we're here, to inform people, let people know what the truth is. And one of the challenges is getting that information out there. You have a diminished press corps, and you need resources to understand, not just hear the information, to understand it and get context. And that's where our Washington Policy Center comes in. That's where our report card for Washington's future come in, so that you can actually see where we've come from and where we are now, so that you're not just assuming, oh, well, things are going pretty well here. We live in a beautiful state. It's getting sunny outside. Things are going to go well here forever. If you actually take a look at context and where we're headed policy-wise, we've got some bumpy roads ahead, and we can fix them, but we need to, people who want that fix need to be as united as possible and as vocal as possible. And that means, doing things like joining Washington Policy Center, sharing our information, making sure more people see it, because listen, it doesn't get any more active in a vacuum or shut in a closet or anything like that. Mark, you've been on the show here a number of times over the past several weeks, so I really appreciate you taking the time again. And we'll see you in about, I think, 3 weeks here on Washington Policy on the Go. So thank you.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks for everyone joining.
You bet. And thanks to everybody for joining. We'll be with you next week. Paul Guppy is going to take any question you want. It's basically ask Paul Guppy anything. And he is a guy who has followed everything for a number of years in the state. So we'll get his take on what's next in the legislative session, what's happened over the course of the week. And we thank you for that. Be sure to check WashingtonPolicy.org, our website and our blog every day, for the newest materials from our center directors. And also be sure to like and subscribe our YouTube channel, where you get updates via video. And if that's more accessible to you and easier to use, be sure to check out our YouTube channel and like and subscribe there. Thanks again for joining us here on Washington Policy on the Go. We'll see you in 1 week.